to welcome you all and to introduce Jon Kabat-Zinn on behalf of the Dartmouth Hitchcock Medical Center Palliative Care Service.
Thank you. Thank you. This talk is really not about me or what I have to say. It's about us. It's about every single one of us, and in some sense, what the potential is, as the slide says, for living your moments as if they really mattered. And I put a little asterisk in there, just kind of an aside, and they actually do. The reason they do is because we're only alive when we're alive. This seems kind of a no-brainer, but you could say that a lot of our lives we're walking around with a no-brainer, or just basically no brain, or the brain is on autopilot or something like that. And what mindfulness really is about is bringing it back online, so to speak, in the present moment, because that turns out to be the only moment any of us ever have. But we're so good at thinking, so incredibly good at thinking, that we can spend enormous amounts of our time and energy absorbed in the past. Have you noticed that? Like, just incredible preoccupations about who's to blame for why it's like this, or how great it was in the good old days and why can't it be that way now. So there's a tremendous attraction to the past, or a tremendous aversion, but whether it's attraction or aversion, we spend a lot of time there. Would you agree? Have you noticed that a lot of the time, if you check on what your mind is up to, it's up to memory. It's up to thinking about things that are already over to a large degree. The other favorite preoccupation of the mind is in the opposite direction, the future. And if, again, you check in every once in a while, just to, sometimes I like to say, you can call yourself up. You may have to, because we're on 24/7. We're just infinitely connected. Probably every single person has one of these in pocket. I hope there are some exceptions. But, and they're called smart phones, but they're not. But they can really dumb us down, because we can be infinitely connected everywhere except here. And so we may need to call ourselves up every once in a while. Hello, John, are you actually here? And the answer is no, I'm off in the future thinking. What are our favorite preoccupations in the future? Well, one is worrying. I don't know about in the North Country, maybe you've gone beyond worrying, but in the rest of the world, a lot of worry about things that haven't happened yet and may never happen. In fact, Mark Twain is famous for having said, and you've probably heard this in a lot of different sort of guises, but he's famous for having said, there's been a huge amount of tragedy in my life, and some of it actually happened. Now, how many of you would like the future to be different from the way we think it's going to turn out? Anybody ever find yourself wishing the future was going to be like majorly different, that we'd make some kind of change in the world? Raise your hands. I want to just feel in the audience. So if we hope for the future to be different, the only place we have to stand is now. Mm-hmm. Because, first of all, it's the future of all the moments that have come before. So if you want to be in the future, here you are. This is actually non-trivial. It's not just, tell us something interesting. Because what it invites is a kind of shift in perception and a shift in awareness, a shift in consciousness that allows us to actually live our lives as if they really mattered in the only moment we ever have. And part of that means being embodied. Because a lot of the time, we are lost in thought. That's another thing you'll notice if you start to pay attention to your mind, is that it's all over the place. It's all over the place. You don't even have to meditate for that to happen. It's its default mode. It's default mode. You don't even have to have a smartphone. You don't even have to have email. You don't even have to have a computer. It's the default mode of the mind to be all over the place. It thinks this and it thinks that. And it likes this and it hates that. And it's like, wants to approach this, but really wants to stay away from that. And it's like wired into our biology. That's called the approach avoidance. And it's kind of, the hemispheres are actually somewhat divided in terms of left hemisphere in the frontal cortical region is more approach related. And right activation, more, and that's one of the fundamental biological, features of living systems. Move towards food, move away from danger. Perfectly natural. But how we actually modulate those impulses and those reflexes and those, kinds of unconscious urges that drive us and that cause us to be reactive a lot of the time is really an art form. It's the art, if you will, of living our lives as if they really mattered. And when we begin to actually drop in on ourselves, and I brought a few props, So sometimes I said, when we begin to drop in on ourselves, we can actually reclaim this moment in this body, with this heart, with this mind, and begin to shift the default setting on how we live our lives. Begin to actually move in a direction of greater balance of mind, greater groundedness in the body, greater clarity of sight, greater, if you will, recognition of what's actually unfolding moment by moment, that's not so conditioned by whether it's we like it or not. Because the world, maybe you haven't noticed this yet, but it's not actually organized around you being the center of the universe. I know that's really disappointing because I'm guessing now, don't take offense again, but I'm guessing that you are entirely organized around you being the center of the universe. Every single one of us is. It's almost unavoidable. It's almost unavoidable. And that actually has representations in the brain it's turning out. That there are medial networks in the frontal cortex and that is actually called the default mode. And it's what they think, brain neuroscientists think, is what's happening when you're not doing anything. Well, it turns out when you're not doing anything, you're very busy. You're very, very, very busy. And one of the ways that's described is that your mind is wandering. And now there's an entire field in neuroscience focused on mind wandering. How many of you have noticed that your mind sometimes just has a life of its own? It goes here, it goes there. It's like, loves to be entertained. It's very entertaining. And if you start to pay attention, because what we're talking about, what mindfulness is actually awareness. Can you feel how radical a shift that would be in your life? To just take one moment and allow everything to be as it is instead of wishing it was one way or another? The Buddhists would call that liberation. It's a kind of freedom that no one else can give you, but that allows us to, in some sense, rotate in consciousness so that for one moment, we're stepping outside of time. Because if you live in the now, well, maybe you've had this experience. Just check your watch and take a look right now. And what time is it? I'll tell you what time it is. It's now. And every time you check your watch or your phone, it's now again. Society has reached a point where we're beginning to understand that the exponentially increasing levels of stress in medicine, in our professional lives, in our personal lives, at every age, really require some kind of shift that is not in the form of taking some pill to numb yourself out to it or get it together, but that actually we need to cultivate what's often spoken of as the domain of being in order to not be so overwhelmed by all the doing and the performing. And while it's true that with the Olympic team, we were using mindfulness to actually improve their performance, it was a kind of Zen operation in the sense that you can't improve performance by trying to improve performance, especially with the mind, because the kind of mind that's grasping for an outcome is exactly the kind of mind that gets in the way of any desirable outcome. Have you got that? Did you catch that as it flew by? Okay. So this means we're in new territory. One example, a common example. You can't get to sleep by forcing yourself to get to sleep. By telling yourself how important the meeting is you have tomorrow. In fact, that's probably a very bad idea because that thought will actually secrete one more thought about the meeting or the stakes of it, and then that will lead to something else in this default network of mind wandering. And pretty soon, you are wide awake, desperately wanting to be asleep and not knowing how to get there. Okay? So it's non-trivial to actually befriend our own minds and our own lives in such a way that we can actually work in these paradoxical ways where striving won't do it. Striving won't do it. That doesn't mean that I'm advocating that all of us abandon ambition or don't care about anything. Meditation is not about becoming stupid. Even being non-judgmental is not about becoming stupid. It can sound like, well, don't judge anything, maybe I'll just walk off the stage and break my leg, No, I'm aware that the edge of the stage is here, and if I do fall off the stage and break my leg, it will have been a moment of mindlessness or out of touchness, if you will. There's a big difference between between judgment and discernment. So mindfulness is all about discerning with clarity what's actually going on. If you peel back all those layers, there's some really, 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 really interesting reason why you're here. And I'll bet you don't know what it is. I'm not joking. Because there are intelligences at work that are just deeper than the thought function. And the thought function is so smart that it sometimes outsmarts us completely. Have you noticed that? And then it's like we're stupid. We're so smart, we're stupid. It's very hard to see that in yourself, but you can see it in other people just really easily. Maybe you've noticed that. So I'm going to try to weave together a whole bunch of things that probably none of it's going to make complete sense, but what I'm doing here is I'm trying to, in some sense, plant seeds. I'm trying to plant seeds in the fertile ground or garden of whatever it was that brought you here, so that when you leave here, something has been touched that will keep those seeds that actually I'm not planting, they are already in you, keep them being watered, nurtured, protected, privileged in a certain way, so that it nurtures, in some profound sense, some aspect of you that wants to be as alive as you can be while you have the chance. We say to people coming to our stress reduction clinic, and they come with every conceivable kind of human ailment, referred by every conceivable subspecialty and specialty and generalist in medicine. And it's an 8-week-long course designed to teach you how to take better care of yourself as a complement to whatever the healthcare system is, I should call it a disease care system, by the way, can do with you, can do for you. And we say to them, from our perspective, as long as you're breathing, there's more right with you than wrong with you, no matter what's wrong with you. Okay? No matter what's wrong with you. And very, very important because, I started the stress reduction clinic in 1979. In 1979, a Surgeon General's report came out called Healthy People. And what it was saying is, forecasting into the future, which is here now, we're in this future, that no matter how much money America spends throwing money at health and health care, it will never be enough to have health. Because there's a missing ingredient, and that's the humans that the health care is supposed to care for. And that there's not enough money on the planet to do all the various things that would have to be done to us when we don't take care of ourselves, when we don't know how to handle stress, when we do not know how to be in wise relationship with our lives and our lifestyle and our diet and exercise and our bodies and aging and everything else, that if we leave that all to, auto mechanics model of medicine, you drive your car around until it breaks down, then you get the carburetor replaced or the engine or whatever, or the tires. But this is not a machine. Okay? I know a lot of people, even in biology, love to use machine analogies and even nano machine analogies about the body. And to a degree, they're correct. But there's another piece of it, like no one understands the construction of the machine that's you. So learning, and out of that learning, growing. And out of that growing, healing, which in my vocabulary, the way I define healing is coming to terms with things as they are. Coming to terms with things as they are. Very different from curing. There are very few cures in medicine, but the opportunity for healing, as long as there's breath, it's in some sense already here. All we need to do is see it, feel it, live it. And it's not about denying pain and suffering. It's about, in some sense, befriending even that. So resting for a final few moments in stillness, in silence, in wakefulness, in full awareness. Outside of time, as if you had nothing to do, no place to go, nothing to do, and nothing to attain. Because you're already whole. The root meaning, by the way, of the words health and healing, and even the word holy, H-O-L-Y. And by the same token, the word medicine and the word meditation, they grow out of the same tree, same root, Indo-European root. Medicine and meditation are joined at the hip. So it's not so radical to actually bring them together in mainstream clinical care. In fact, it's essential for caring. So now the real meditation practice never stops. Just because some bells got rung, just because we're going to shift gears a little bit. The real meditation practice is how you live your life from moment to moment. It's not how good you are sitting without moving, or what great yoga poses you do, because yoga is itself a meditation, a beautiful form of meditation that we use enormously and to good purpose in MBSR, Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction. The root cause of suffering in human beings is not knowing how to deal with our emotions, because we don't know how to inhabit and then shift our relationship to what he calls implicational meaning. Implicational meaning is what moves, say, in poetry. Okay? It's different from the propositional meaning, which is just the kind of bare facts. Okay? So if I'll recite a poem for you. This is a poem by Antonio Machado, who's a great Spanish poet of the turn of the 19th to 20th century and won the Nobel Prize. It's very short, but see if you can feel it. The wind, one brilliant day, called to my soul with an odor of jasmine. The wind, one brilliant day, called to my soul with an odor of jasmine. In exchange for the odor of my jasmine, I would like the odor of your roses. I have no roses. All the flowers in my garden are dead. Can you feel that? And how many times have we had that feeling or a similar feeling? I have no roses. There's nothing beautiful about me. All the flowers in my garden are dead. Well then, I'll take the withered petals and the yellowed leaves and the waters in the fountain. And the wind left, and I wept. And I said to myself, what have you done to the garden that was entrusted to you? Can you feel that? This is a poem about great sadness. Could easily go into depression. I actually, just because a Nobel laureate doesn't mean, I like to actually change the last line. And I would suggest that for our purposes, rather than what have you done to the garden that was entrusted to you, which is a kind of blaming, wouldn't you say? I mean, it's like, stick the knife in and then, right, as long as I'm feeling down, why not just go right over the edge? And a lot of cultures actually perpetrate that kind of perspective. But instead, why don't we say, what are we doing with the gardens that are entrusted to us? Gardens, plural, okay? Because right now we have a lot of gardens entrusted to us, I would say. The closest to us is, I would say, the garden of the body. Better than an American Express credit card. You can't leave home without it. But a lot of the time, we're not even in the body. And a lot of the time, our feelings about the body are so negative that, the less said, the better. Just don't bother me about the body. I don't even want to know it exists. If it is not driving me crazy, I feel lucky. James Joyce is famous for starting out a short story in Dubliners with the following sentence. This is an approximation, but it's, Mr. Duffy lived a short distance from his body. And if you start to pay attention in the way that I'm suggesting, in the present moment, you'll discover that that's your address as well. A lot of the time, we're in our heads, lost in thought, someplace else, not in the body. That has biological consequences, by the way. Everything I've said tonight, when I started the stress reduction clinic in 1979, it was like there was almost no science of the effects of stress and the biology of stress on the body and on the mind and on the brain and on the heart. Now, the data is just overwhelming, including, as I'll show you in a minute, aging. That it's turning out that, stress, they used to say stress is not a real risk factor for morbidity or mortality because, it's not like, high-fat diet, it's not like cigarette smoking, it's not like hypertension, high blood pressure. But now it turns out there's incontrovertible evidence that stress actually increases the rate of degradation of the ends of all of our chromosomes, which are called telomeres. You're going to hear a lot more about that word. The woman, Liz Blackburn at UCSF, who actually discovered telomerase, which is the enzyme that builds them back up, won the Nobel Prize in 2008. Okay? And her lab is studying the effects of mindfulness on telomeres and telomerase. And the evidence is moving in the direction of meditation can actually enhance telomerase. And And not just that, it's more than meditation or mindfulness. It's your attitude towards what's happening. It's not like these people aren't under a huge amount of stress, but it's never the stress. It's how you choose to be in relationship to it. And if you have really exhausted your resources for handling stress, then of course, yeah, all bets are off. But if you know how to draw resources to yourself, then even under very, very high levels of stress, you can dance with the energies. Sometimes it's unbelievably painful, but nevertheless, you're much bigger even than the pain and suffering, and liberate yourself from that. And guess what? The telomeres get longer. So every aspect of our biology is what's now called plastic. And that's a new terminology. It's not like, Dustin Hoffman in The Graduate. This is for the older people in the room. But it means that our biology is miraculous in another way. It's constantly reorganizing itself. It's not just it's all downhill from here. Yes, there is aging. Yes, we are all going to die unless somebody makes a very important discovery very quickly. But, the question is not, is there life after death, or is there some way to escape death, but actually, can we live while we have a chance? Is there life before death? That's the most interesting question. And right up to the moment of death. And a lot of time I think that really when we talk about fear of death, we're really more afraid of life than we are of death. I didn't want to continue a career in molecular biology. I wanted to bring my training as a scientist together with my training in meditation, because it seemed like, well, everybody's doing the science, but nobody's paying attention to the balance between thought and this other function of our brains and nervous system that no one's paying attention to, called awareness, that is patently obviously bigger than thought, because whatever thought you have or whatever emotion you have, you could embrace it in awareness and not have to do anything with it, but it would change by virtue of simply holding it in awareness, if you were patient enough to do it, especially if it didn't feel good. And so that's what we teach now, and it's come into the mainstream of medicine in ways that are really astonishing. The National Institutes of Health is funding hundreds of studies on mindfulness to the tunes of hundreds of millions of dollars. And the idea that that would have been the case in 1979, I like to say, more improbable than that the Big Bang would just all of a sudden stop and implode back on itself. And yet it's happening. And so mindfulness is now in the mainstream of medicine, being fully present. Okay? Is anybody good at this? No. Okay? So don't make like, oh, I'm no good at this. Nobody's any good at it. But all you need to do is be a little bit better than automatic pilot, and your life will rotate. I mean, it will be very, very different. And every time anger comes up, the default mode comes up, whether it's anger or anything else. Thich Nhat Hanh likes to say, the reason we have to practice mindfulness, the reason we have to cultivate it intentionally, is that we're busy cultivating the opposite all day long. Cultivating anger, cultivating jealousy, cultivating, low self-esteem, cultivating, all sorts of negativity in the emotional domain or in the thought domain. And the people who are doing the telomere research are saying that their research is showing that the real stress comes from thinking. So this is a biological and molecular biological consequence that accelerates aging and accelerates a lot of heart disease. I mean, you can't interview people who die of sudden cardiac death. But if you could, you find out, probably it was a thought that did it. The wrong thought at the wrong time, dead. I'm actually not joking. I mean, it's so serious that we need to laugh. And I want to say that about meditation too. It may have seemed like I'm not taking this stuff seriously. This stuff is so serious that it's too serious to take too seriously. And I'm serious. But look at this, also in that study. This is a perceived scale, a perceived stress scale. It's the perception of stress that makes the difference. If you are just dealing with it because it's the way it is, then you can be more transparent to the stress. Your telomeres are longer. If you take everything personally, your telomeres degrade. So if you want one take-home message from this turns out to be harder to enact than it is to say. Don't take things personally when they're not personal. Okay? Then you might ask, well, when are they not personal? That's a good question to keep asking yourself. It may be they're never personal. It may be that the you that you think you are is not the real you, that you're much bigger. And now the neuroscience is actually showing that. You want to be your narrative self? Fine. Then you're using certain regions of the brain. You want to be your direct moment-by-moment experiential self, grounded in the body? You're using lateral networks in the brain, a whole different brain profile. So you choose. One is related more to happiness. The left activation in the prefrontal cortex, if you put monks in the scanners, and I'll show you some pictures of that, they have tremendous activation in the left prefrontal cortex, in particular regions that have to do with approach and that have to do with emotional balance. And when we train people in MBSR, they shift from right activation to left activation in 8 weeks. Okay? Their brains actually change structure in 8 weeks because this doesn't stop. It's called your life. And it's all really more than magnificent. And if you can get into that implicational meaning of the poems, the poetry, then there's the potential to actually live your life as if it really mattered moment by moment. And it turns out that that's recruiting and morphing brain pathways that when you're depressed and you're into depressive rumination, it's not about shutting that stuff off, that kind of toxic thought stream, but actually learning how to hold it differently, and then you don't take it personally, and then you actually don't fall into depression. You don't relapse into depression, and I'm talking major depressive disorder. And that affects your telomeres, and that affects actually gene expression in your body, upregulating and downregulating hundreds of genes that have to do with cancer and that have to do with inflammatory responses. So if your whole body is really plastic, and the more you tune the mind and the body together, the more you participate in your own health and well-being. I like to call the medicine of the future, or the medicine of the present actually, participatory medicine. That's what, because there's not enough money to fund medicine if we just use the auto mechanics model. So we need to all participate. And isn't it interesting that in order to participate, the greatest evidence is suggesting we need to go back to ancient practices from very, very old traditions that are mostly not from this side of the planet, but that it turns out have deep, deep connections with our culture and with our nervous system and with our love. So I'll leave it at that. I want to thank you for your attention, and I'm open to having a few questions.
So sometimes I think about how if the world is becoming more stressful or complicated, and our answer is change yourself, change your relationship with that stress. I don't know how to say it, but...
I got it.
Yeah.
Thanks. That's the other half of my talk.
All right.
So thank you for bringing that up. So let me just very quickly say, this isn't about changing yourself. It's about, it's exactly the opposite of changing yourself. It's recognizing the beauty in yourself already. No change necessary. Now imagine if the Congress actually were mindful. Okay? There is a congressman in the Congress now, Tim Ryan from the 17th District in Ohio, who is doing everything he can to bring mindfulness into the mainstream in political and economic circles. Okay? The much larger thing, and I wrote 100 pages about mindful politics and coming to our senses. This is not about forgetting about social change or transformation, but in order to really have profound social change that's in alignment with humanity and with kindness, we have to look at our own minds, because even the social change agents are driven by greed, hatred, and delusion, just like all the rest of us. Okay, so until we learn how to sort of at least recognize the toxic or the sort of acquisitive, aggressive, violent aspects in ourselves, then we can do all we want to transform the institutions and even the laws, but human beings being what they are, what we need to do is have the species come into its own, because we call ourselves Homo sapiens sapiens. In Latin, sapere is the verb to taste or to know, K-N-O-W. So Homo sapiens sapiens is a species that knows and knows that it knows. In other words, awareness, yes, and meta-awareness, awareness of awareness. Now, if we really, that would be wisdom. If we actually were wise, then we would see what war does to societies. We would understand that we, with the kind of precocity in weapons and firepower and everything, we need to find other ways of resolving human conflict. But where's that going to come from? It's going to come out of the same human heart and the same human mind, and of corporations, which after all mean bodies, okay? The corpus, or the body politic. And that's made up of human beings. So we do need to sort of tune the instrument on lots of different levels, including the law and jurisprudence, in order to actually privilege awareness over a kind of dualistic, adversarial condition where it's really winners and losers.
So I'm a resident at the hospital here,
Okay.
and it's definitely not encouraged for us to take care of ourselves, and
It
the
isn't?
amount of stresses and appointments and phone calls. I'm in psychiatry in 30 minutes to adjust meds, and
right.
also the person wants to talk to me
Right.
and all of that, and it's completely stressed me out. But if I were to say that, you know what, I'm going to go for lunch and we're not really doing anything. I'm going to go meditate for an hour and then I'm going to be so much more there for my patients. It probably, even with these kind, good
Attending.
mentors, it's not going to fly. And I advise my patients on these things. But still, the medical professionals are supposed to be these superhuman people that I'm not,
Right. In a talk like this, I can, in some sense, only point to how deeply the penetration has gone. However, what you're saying is not deep enough by any stretch of the imagination. And it takes a long, long time to shift a culture that has its own self-interest. A long time. Well, yeah, but you could set up an MBSR. I mean, maybe there is. Is there an MBSR clinic at
not even close.
at Hitchcock? Well, that's not that radical to do. Are you in psychiatry?
Yes.
Yeah, well, it's not that radical to do. Maybe medicine should do it if psychiatry has an aversion to the mind-body connection. I even know gastroenterologists who are working with veterans who have PTSD, and pulmonologists, and this transcends specialty. So
there are some, and you would hope psychiatry would be the most open to it.
Well, I don't know if I would hope,
can
but
say
you
I
would
haven't
hope.
brought
If
it
you
up,
hope it, then make it happen. You see, the psychiatry of the future, where does it lie?
Not in medication.
Well, where does it lie? I'm being serious with you now.
Well, I think in the neurosciences and things
No,
that
no,
you're...
I'm looking for something much simpler. It lies with you.
Oh.
It lies with that impulse to have come to this talk. Right. It lies with that impulse to go to the Shambhala Center and clear your mind and then be more present. If you want the medicine of the future to be different, or the psychiatry of the future to be different, don't look around for someone else to do it.
Right.
You do it. When will you be good enough? Never. Because part of your mind will tell you, you don't have enough power, you don't have enough influence, you don't have enough this. You got plenty. As a medical resident, as a psychiatry resident, you got plenty. And if people don't want to do it, that's too bad. But you can take the initiative, and I'm not joking. I mean, we're really talking about a rotation in consciousness here, and the institutions change when people are willing to actually own how you take it, and you've had enough medical training to actually be able to make cogent arguments that a lot of the way the healthcare system is set up, I'm guessing just from what you said, is toxic to the people that you're most trying to help. What kind of a setup is that? Even if you have a better medical record system.
Oh, yeah. Right.
So, I mean, between the two of you, you have an insurrection. If there are, how many other people are here with that? How many are oh, so now you have a revolution. I mean, you know, so, listen, that's how institutions change. And you can do it with tremendous intelligence, with tremendous propriety, with tremendous intentionality and kindness, so that it's not like you're going to go and just sort of be obnoxious and tell everybody else what they're doing wrong, but to actually offer a new option that, I'm not joking, folks, people are dying for. People are dying for it, metaphorically and literally. And there's never been more scientific evidence in favor of moving in this direction. So in some sense, what I'm saying is, the responsibility for the future of not only medicine, but our society is a distributive responsibility. And as I like to say, the world needs all its flowers, and you're one, whether your mind says, it's like depressive rumination, he means everybody else in the room, but not me. No, I mean you. And so if you don't recognize the flower that you are and the genius that you are and the beauty that you are, and take it and some place where it can illuminate some tiny little corner that may be insignificant but isn't. You think it is, but it isn't. And just apply what you care most deeply about there. That's how the care gets back into health care. We're not talking about health insurance reform. We're talking about health care reform, and we haven't seen the beginning of health care reform. And when we do, it will be a participatory medicine. It will be recruiting the interior dimensionality and resources that every single human being, by virtue of being born a human being, has to one degree or another, and that degree is huge. And we need to learn how to recruit it, because anything else will just be technology, and it will be all doing based and none of it being based. And we're not called human doings, we're called human beings. So at that, I'm going to stop it, because again, it's late, but thank you very much for your attention. I'm a member of Shambhala.